As I entered the basin, my eyes caught sight of the sixth geyser in action. It was like no other, spewing out a column of water that reached a height of 100 feet. The crevice from which it emerged was irregularly shaped, measuring 4 feet in length and 3 feet in width. Surrounding the opening there were capricious formations of sediment-indented globules of various sizes that resembled a strange, alien landscape. I marveled at the scene before me, noticing little hollows in the crust filled with water. They contained small white spheres of tufa the size of a nutmeg, which I reckoned formed around some nuclei. We decided to give each active geyser a name that would describe its peculiarities. The name the one we had just witnessed Old Faithful, due to the predictability of its eruptions. The column of water spouted from this geyser every 60 to 65 minutes, reaching a height of 80 to 100 feet each time. Another geyser that caught our attention was the Fan. It had a distorted pipe projecting 2 radiating sheets of water that resembled a feather fan, reaching a height of 60 feet. 40 feet from this geyser was a vent, 2 feet in diameter, which expelled dense volumes of vapor to a height of 50 feet, accompanied by loud reports during eruptions. We also found the grotto, once we become aware of its winding apertures penetrating the sinter surrounding it. When we first stumbled upon it, it appeared dormant, giving little indication of its true nature. However, Private Williamson, a member of our escort, crawled through an aperture and peered into the discharging orifice. Later, when it erupted once again, spewing a column of boiling water 2 feet in diameter to a height of 60 feet, and a scalding stream of 200 square inches flowing from the very same cavern he had entered only a brief while ago, he likened the experience to escaping from being cooked alive. On top of a rocky summit there lies a formation known as the Castle. It earned its name due to its resemblance to an old crumbling tower with its turrets broken off. The material surrounding it is composed of siliceous sinter that takes on the appearance of small globules, reminiscent of a mature cauliflower. The large nodules suggest that water once flowed far more vehemently than it does currently. The geyser, standing at a height of 60 feet and a diameter of 4 feet, spews out boiling water with an angry ebullition that causes the vent nearby to constantly course with the same. The most wondrous spring in the basin is the ultramarine one situated just in front of the Castle geyser. Circular in shape with diameters of approximately 20 and 25 feet, the sides of the spring appear as if they are corrugated and funnel-shaped. It extends to a depth of 30 feet before opening up into a cavern whose depths are impossible to measure, with beautifully scalloped edges surrounding the rim of the spring. Unlike other springs, this one does not boil over. A small stream of water dribbles from it while retaining its appearance, despite the proximity of the geyser's spouting. Evidently, there is no link between this particular spring and the geyser. The giant geyser is a tumultuous deposit that takes on the shape of a miniature coliseum. It possesses an opening measuring 3 feet in diameter. This geyser's unique aspect is its long duration of discharge. Yesterday afternoon it continued to spew steaming water in a steady stream that lasted for over an hour, measuring 3 feet wide and ascending to 140 feet in height. On the east bank of the Firehole River, just across from our camp, stood a strikingly symmetrical cone. It looked like a straw beehive from the olden days, but missing its pointy top. This intriguing cone measured about 5 feet wide at the base and boasted an irregular oval-shaped orifice with scalloped edges. Inside, it spanned an impressive 24 by 36 inches in diameter. We hadn't given it much heed until this morning. After all, with so many wonders in this place, it had escaped a second glance. During breakfast, we heard a commotion, and, to our surprise, a towering column of water shot up from the cone. We estimated its height to be an incredible 219 feet through careful triangulation. We marked a spot on the ground that aligned with a nearby tree branch and the top of the water column. After measuring the branch's height from the ground and the distance from the branch to the observation point and the geyser cone, we could accurately calculate the column's height. We named this newly discovered geyser the Beehive. Further ahead, we encountered the Giantess, the largest geyser we had seen erupt thus far. We climbed a gentle slope for 60 yards before arriving at an irregularly oval sink or well that measured 15 by 20 feet across. From where we stood, we could gaze down 50 feet or more, but we saw no water, only hearing it churning deep within the vertical cavern. Suddenly the water began spluttering and rising upwards with alarming speed, and our group frantically scampered to the windward side of the geyser. When the water stopped rising around 25 feet from the surface, we peered down at the foaming liquid. It periodically emitted hot jets that shot almost to the top. Then the water spurted upwards, gaining momentum at a remarkable 5 feet per second rate. When it was near the top of the well, it exploded out with unprecedented force in a tremendous 60-foot wide column. The colossal column held its position for about a minute before something incredible happened. 5 smaller plumes of water, ranging from 6 to 15 inches in diameter, burst forth from the peak of the aqueous behemoth and shot up an astonishing 250 feet into the sky. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. This was, without question, the most awe-inspiring sight I had ever witnessed. We stood on the sunlit side of the geyser, where the radiance of the beaming sun imbued the mammoth mass with the brilliance of 1,000 rainbows. These dazzling projections vanished, only to be replaced by multitudes of others that flitted and flickered throughout the spray for the 20 minutes that the eruption raged on. These smaller jets must have sprouted from auxiliary pipes that led to the primary orifice, located near the bottom of the geyser, where the explosive energy was concentrated. They were thrust higher than the main column and streamed through it, creating an otherworldly spectacle of blazing colors and iridescent textures. As the mighty column dwindled, the tiny droplets that it produced glittered like a rain of diamonds, and around every shadow that the towering steam plume cast, a radiant halo emerged, similar to those that feature so frequently in depictions of the Savior. We both agreed that this was the high point of our journey. Mr. Hedges and I waded across the Firehole River just south of our camp. The water surged over boulders at a fast pace, so we removed our boots and socks, and searching for what we thought was a smooth surface of rock spanning both banks, we ventured into the stream. When I found myself halfway across, I took a break and turned to speak to Mr. Hedges, who was entering the water at that moment. As I stood there, I sensed a warmth beneath my feet that halted me in my tracks. I realized that I was standing on a layer of mineral deposits created by a hot spring that was seeping through the riverbed. I called out to Hedges excitedly, "This is the river Bridger told us was hot at the bottom." The geysers erupting before us were a magnificent sight to behold, but how many more lay hidden in this wondrous basin we could only guess. We lamentably had to leave before we could even hope to explore half of it. No less than 1,000 pipes pierced the soil, with 100 or 200 appearing as likely to be geysers as those we had already witnessed. This land quaked with incessant and active internal pressure from volcanic forces, seeking release through the countless springs, jets, volcanoes, and geysers manifesting on its surface. Without these vents, they might have exploded out in one colossal eruption to form a volcano of gargantuan proportions. Undoubtedly, many of the things we saw on were of recent origin, and many of the dormant craters had only just ceased their activity. They erupted frequently, many taking on new shapes and forms, all testifying to the ongoing presence of volcanic force. The water in some of these springs mirrored the hues of precious gems coveted by many. In one, the water looked like an emerald, in another a piece of turquoise, in another it had the ultramarine sheen of sapphire, and in another the color of topaz. It seemed appropriate and only fitting that many of these springs be named after these jewels. At 9:30 this morning, the packers with the pack train and a few of us from our party broke camp. Some of us stayed behind for a last glimpse of the giantess geyser's eruption, but we were let down as it gave no indication of an eruption, even though the water visible below, typically about 20 feet deep, rose suddenly by 8 or 10 feet in the well, only to fall back down just as quickly. We trekked down the east bank of the river, through an open valley, and then through fallen trees. After about 8 miles, we happened upon a mammoth dark blue spring, the biggest one yet. Mr. Hauser measured it and reported it to be 400 feet in diameter. The mineral solution had overflowed onto the sides, covering a distance of 200 yards, with the spring itself perched 30 feet higher than the average level of the valley. Out in the midst of the lake, the water bubbles up a few feet without any particular commotion. The body of water doesn't have a distinct outlet, but rather spills over in various places, with the excess flowing down the incline of the crusted mound, forming a stream about 1/4 of an inch deep. As we stood on the lake's edge, a small flock of ducks flew down towards the lake as if to make a landing. However, as they glided above the surface of the water, they seemed to sense a danger, and with a quick flapping of their wings, all but one flew up into the sky again. The one duck, with too much momentum during its descent, splashed down into the water with great force. Despite its frantic attempts to ascend once again, it was useless, and with a few sharp cries of pain, the fellow ducks who had escaped responded to its distress calls, and in no time the unfortunate duck became what we would call a dead duck. We didn't bother giving the lake a name. Approximately 100 yards away from the lake, on the side closest to the river, the crust ruptures abruptly, revealing another vast lake that's about 15 feet below the larger one above. Farther down the river stream, one can find a few more springs. Jake Smith, for the first time during the trip, discovered an odd tufa specimen at this larger lake. This was such an unusual occurrence that Hedges drew our attention to it. But while Smith was cautiously holding on to his gem while riding his horse, the animal stumbled. Smith lost his specimen and, exhibiting behavior that goes against his own biblical teachings, deemed all the group's specimens worthless before lambasting the pointlessness of gathering them. From this juncture, we trekked down the valley adjacent to the riverbank. The area on our right was incredibly damp, and from afar we could see one mammoth fountain of water spurting into the sky at a remarkable altitude, as well as many other steam jets. Due to the marsh-like nature of the terrain, we opted not to explore them any further. We set out from Helena on August the 17th with the idea that we'd be back in 25 days or less, and we packed a 30-day supply of provisions just in case. But we've been gone for 34 days now, and the extra time has left us with a bit of a food shortage. Thankfully, we had some dried fish that we caught while camped out on Yellowstone Lake to hold us over. Today, I was riding alongside Stickney and griping about our meager food stash when I asked him if he liked maple sugar. He said not to tease him, but I surprised him by pulling out a nice big cake that I'd brought all the way from Helena and kept untouched for over 5 weeks. We all enjoyed it, but Stickney was particularly grateful for his share. He even joked that I always seemed to have something up my sleeve, comparing my resourcefulness to Jake Smith's poker skills. We covered about 18 miles today, and just as the sun was setting, we crossed over a forested ridge and made camp where the Firehole River meets another sizable stream that flows in from the east. We haven't given it a name yet, but it's impressive nonetheless. Tuesday, September 20th. We left our campsite at 9:30 in the morning, following the jagged rocks of the riverbank by the rapids. After making our way through a breathtaking pine forest and trudging over fallen timber, scorched black by a ferocious fire, we arrived back at the river. It took us roughly 4 miles to reach this point, where the river made a westward bend. Lieutenant Doane and I ventured to the top of one of the 2 hills in our path, granting us a magnificent 30-mile view of the surrounding terrain. The evening prior and early that morning, our group had engaged in an unusual conversation. Somebody in the party proposed that we capitalize on our exploration by claiming quarter sections of land at the most compelling points of interest. A thorough discussion ensued. A member of our expedition suggested that we obtain preemption rights to a couple of quarter sections of land opposite the lower Yellowstone waterfall, stretching them down the river along the canyon. They believed that it would result in a substantial profit for the claimants. Another member of our group believed that it would be preferable to claim a section of land in the upper geyser basin. This locality was quickly accessible to tourists and pleasure seekers, making it a more attractive option for those seeking a quick getaway. Another option was that every member of the party should preempt a claim, and we could all throw them into a shared pool for everyone's benefit. Mr. Hedges then aired his disagreement, stating that he didn't approve of any of these plans. He felt that there should be no individual ownership of any part of that region, that the entirety of it should be designated as a grand national park. Besides, he felt it was our duty to take steps to make that a reality. All but one member of our party concurred with his suggestion, and our ardor for this project has increased with every passing hour. As we traveled, the topic that dominated our discussion was clear. It weighed heavily on my mind, keeping me awake for half the night. If my companion Hedges lost sleep due to my tossing and turning, he only has his ill-conceived national park proposal to blame. But despite the challenges we face, our mission to establish a national park is one we must pursue with relentless determination. It will take hard work, and we will need to overcome the skepticism and doubt of our political leaders. But I believe we can succeed. In all my travels, I have never seen a place more deserving of national park status than this one. The wonders on display are unlike anything I've ever encountered. They are diverse, expansive, and wondrous beyond belief. Each day spent exploring them revealed new beauty and left us breathless. Yet even now, as we depart, a nagging doubt creeps in, obscuring our memories like a dark cloud. But we cannot let uncertainty deter us. We must press on, unifying to persuade our leaders of the importance of this cause. For this land and its wonders are worth fighting for. They are a testament to the majesty and grandeur of the American landscape, and they deserve to be preserved for generations to come. Wednesday, September 21st. We packed up camp soon after 9 in the morning, heading northwest down the stream. After 6 miles, the stream led us into a twisting canyon that stretched for 10 miles. The sides of the canyon were steep and adorned with a plethora of small lateral streams. These streams flowed into the main stream, forming a picturesque cascading water show that amazed us all. We also noticed various springs gushing from the canyon's sides far up high. Once we were out of the canyon, we had to travel over a high ridge for 10 miles. We eventually stopped to camp in a deep coulee where we had ample supplies of wood, grass, and fresh water. Mr. Hauser and Mr. Stickney had gone ahead of us for some miles, and during that time they encountered 2 men who looked quite frightened at the sight of them. These men traveled with packed provisions on riding saddles while walking alongside their horses. Mr. Hauser told them that they would encounter our large party up the canyon, but we never saw them again. They probably hid as we passed by. We learned that the Upper Madison is a popular gathering place for horse thieves in this vicinity. Our journey covered 25 miles that day. After a brief conversation that evening, I made the decision to leave the party tomorrow and head to Virginia City. I still believed I could find some traces of Mr. Everts in that town. Virginia City was believed to be just 30 miles away, but we weren't on any trail leading there, so I would have to rely on my instinct to find it. Today, Jake Smith asked whether I expected the readers of my diary to believe everything I've written. He admitted to keeping no diary of his own because some of our discoveries have been so extraordinary that no one would believe his account. He said he wouldn't mind being called a liar by those who know him well, but he wouldn't let strangers call him that. This statement showed that Jake had more wit and philosophy than I ever gave him credit for. Thursday, September 22nd, Virginia City. I set off early this morning from the party, carrying with me only a few necessary comforts: lunch, a bath, and a comfortable chair. The time I would need to reach Virginia City was an uncertainty in my mind. It was around noon when I came across a horseman who had departed from Virginia City earlier that morning. He pointed me towards the trail to the town and generously allowed me to peruse a newspaper he had on him. I learned from it of the French surrender at Sedan. I asked the horseman to give the newspaper to General Washburn, a member of a party he was due to meet in Madison Valley. He promised to make a stop at Bannock George's cabin. The distance from our camp that morning to my current location was much greater than I had anticipated. I didn't arrive in Virginia City until 9 o'clock that night. News about Mr. Everts, who had been lost from our party, has yet to surface. His friends were devastated at the thought of his misfortune. It was late when I arrived, so I hadn't had the chance to meet many of my old friends. Those I did encounter were immensely interested in the outcome of our explorations. I promised to stay another day before setting off to Helena to provide them with a more thorough description of what we had seen. I did manage to have a good meal, though, which was a welcome relief. Tuesday, September 27th. Last night I finally arrived in Helena. News of our group's journey to Virginia City and Mr. Everts's disappearance had already been telegraphed to Helena, so upon my arrival I was quickly bombarded by many of Mr. Everts's friends, curious to know how he became separated from us. Today I spent most of my time regaling people with the wonders we encountered on our trip. I am thankful for the chance to rest and regain some of the weight I lost. At the start of the journey, I weighed over 190 pounds, but now I weigh only 155 pounds. a loss of 35 pounds. One of my friends marvels that I was lucky even to make it back with this much of my body intact. I have received many invitations from households to recount our journey to their friends and families, but my disheveled appearance makes it impossible for me to accept their hospitality. Before anything else, I must seek out a tailor to replenish my wardrobe. Jake Smith is the only one in our group with a suit suitable for a gentleman's company. Throughout my narrations today, I noticed that many of my listeners showed incredulity and sought to dismiss my accounts as exaggerations. I must admit that I am not surprised. Even as I recount these experiences, I can scarcely believe they are real. They seem like sketches from a dream. And when I acknowledge the peculiarity of the scenes, their grandeur, variety, and strange novelty that distinguishes them from anything else in this country, I could hardly fathom that they exist in distant corners of the mountains, concealed from human view. Despite my doubts, however, I know that these natural attractions will stand above all others in the world. The wonders of the natural world leave an indelible mark on the mind, so much so that belief itself is shaken to the core and disbelief is rendered speechless. Perhaps you have gazed upon the majestic Niagara and beheld its breathtaking beauty, its grandeur etched forever in your memory. You can stand in the valley of Yosemite and marvel at its towering mile of granite, recalling every minute detail, but it is in the midst of the canyon and falls, the seething hot springs and pungent sulphur mountain, and most of all the bubbling, seething mud volcano and geysers of the Yellowstone, that all sense of familiarity dissolves and one is immersed in a world of wonder previously unimagined. This is a new chapter in the annals of the natural world, a reimagining of the artistry of the great Creator. Even as you gaze upon these miracles, your mind struggles to grasp their sheer scope and unimaginable wonder. It is as if you require an extra sense to fully comprehend it all and believe what lies before you. The End. In the year 1871, Langford, a man with a great passion for exploring the natural wonders of Yellowstone, teamed up with Ferdinand V. Hayden, a prominent figure in the United States Geological Survey, to embark on yet another expedition into the unknown wilderness. The fruits of their labor were colossal, a comprehensive study of the region containing photographs, graphic depictions, and descriptive narratives, all of which were extensively disseminated. The report played a crucial role in piquing the interest of the masses in preserving Yellowstone's precious resources. Largely due to the tireless efforts of Langford and his associates, Congress was implored to establish a national park in Yellowstone. The stalwarts argued that the park was a one-of-a-kind, priceless gem of nature, something that demanded safeguarding for the prosperity of future generations. Thus, in 1872, the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant, etching in history the creation of the world's first national park. This concludes The Discovery of Yellowstone, written by Doug Richardson, narrated by Bo Carson. Visit BrooksAudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer.